Introduction. When you are writing a thesis, if it is a research paper, then the introduction is usually a couple of pages, right? And those couple of pages, in the start, a couple of lines, the author writes the significance of that work. For example, nowadays there are a lot of problems about energy, and the whole world is after that how to get, how to organize, manage the energy crisis in the world. People are using these ways or routes to convert other things, resources into energy. So you introduce the significance of the project. Then, which route you selected? Are your thesis about hydel power? Then introduce hydel power. That many people, these are not technical words. Several studies have been carried out regarding this subject or this title, and those several should not be in air. You must put the references after that sentence, right? That, for example, if you say several studies, several means at least more than 3, then you must refer there that if somebody is interested in looking into those several studies, then he must be able to go through your thesis to those several studies. Then you mention in your introduction that yes, several studies were carried out, but what were problems encountered by them? Didn't they study the subject very finely and final details were missed? Were there no high resolution techniques there which couldn't be used in that study? So wherever there is a deficiency or gap in the previous studies, you briefly review, very briefly review. Listen to this. Very briefly review the previous literature to squeeze out the aims and objectives of your study. Right? You tell the story in the shortest possible words, but shortest never means that you miss some significant information. The words must be, as I told you, most comprehensive, but this never means that you miss some of very significant previous studies from there. These previous studies are given in a couple of paragraphs or a couple of pages in research thesis. But in research paper, it is a very short introduction people prefer nowadays. In the past, research paper used to be very long, up to 40 pages, 50 pages. Then they were coming down in number. Now people prefer to be maximum 8 pages in standard journals, right? So keeping in view the requirement of the journal, you describe the previous studies in most comprehensive manner. But this description of previous studies is not a story or a news report, but it is an analytical commentary in a sequential and progressional manner to squeeze out your aims and objectives. Analytical description of previous studies and sequential and progressional manner so that you squeeze out the aims and objectives of your studies. For example, that person worked in this area using these techniques and they found this. However, here you include your analysis. The techniques were not that much good. The materials he or she used were not favorable. And many things which you consider significant to create a gap, a reason, a justification for your study. If the study previously done is perfect in all respects, then you don't need to study that. Because research never means to repeat things, to waste resources on what has been previously done. You must have a reason and justification that why you are doing this work. So, in a couple of pages in the introduction chapter, following the introduction of the topic, then the economic or academic significance of the topic, then a brief analytical description, analytical review of the previous studies, and from there you squeeze out the aims and objectives of your study. Once you have reached that level, the next thing is how you will achieve this. And in how you put the research methodology in a couple of sentences. Remember, in a couple of sentences, that I adopted this novel route to achieve my goals of this study. After that, you go into the constitution of your thesis. You say that in chapter 1, I have briefly introduced the topic, the significance of the topic, a very brief description, analytical description of previous studies, followed by the methodology or the methods I'll be going to use to achieve these goals or aims and objectives, and followed by the constitution of the thesis. Then chapter 2, it gives a detailed analytical review of the previous studies, all the important previous studies, the most important previous studies and all the important previous studies. So that literature review chapter is very expanded, in which you put all the required information. That Flane did this work using this technique, using these materials, and their findings were these. Flane also studied this, and they used this technique, and their findings were this. Then you combinedly group the previous studies and squeeze out the aim in a sequential manner again there in chapter 2. In chapter 3, you give the methodology. So you say in chapter 1 that chapter 3 gives the methodology adopted in this study, right? In chapter 4, you give the results. And some people include discussion in the results chapter, and they give it a name, results and discussion. and some people write a separate chapter of discussion, right? Then the last chapter is conclusions, in which you conclude your study, and then you write suggestion for future studies, for future work. Let us go into these a little bit. Literature review. As I told you, don't confuse literature review with the narration of previous studies. People are not interested. If you are narrating the previous studies like a story, and you are not giving any hope to the reader that why you are mentioning these, then the reader is not interested in reading your stories, unnecessary stories. But if you mention the previous studies with an analysis that whether they were required or not, whether they were perfectly done or not, or what is the relationship of this previous study description with your thesis or your work, then people will keep the sequence. I usually give an example that if you say physics, chemistry, biology, Peshawar University, Jamrod, and Peshawar, what is its meaning? So, saying something without knowing the meaning and without convincing the reader that you are logically, analytically, sequentially describe something in a proper order, in a comprehensive language, that will enhance the level of your thesis or of your research article. A comprehensive analytical description of previous studies in a logical and sequential manner to squeeze out or derive the aims and objectives of your research. This is a detailed description of the brief given in the introduction chapter. In the introduction chapter, you just give a paragraph or a few sentences to tell about the previous studies. But here, you give a full chapter to the previous studies. But again and again, I am telling you that it is not reporting. It is an analytical and logical review of the previous studies. Give all the historical or technical details to convince the reader. Because if you don't mention that the previous studies were done in this manner with these instruments for this reason, then the reader cannot be convinced why you are doing this work. Many people are studying the same topic, the same title, but they are studying just different aspect of the same, right? I am doing the phase and microstructural analysis of a material. You are doing the phase and microstructural analysis of a material. Do you know how much broad this topic is? The phase and microstructural analysis. Phase determination is done with X-ray diffraction in 1 hour. You can just put the sample in an hour, you get the plot of X-ray diffraction. The microstructural analysis may take a couple of hours to prepare the sample, put it in the microscope, and study it. So why hundreds of people are doing it for the last 200 years? If it was so simple, then why are people wasting their time? Microstructural analysis can be very gross microstructural analysis with optical microscopy. Microstructural analysis can be a little bit high resolution microscopy with scanning electron microscope. Microstructure analysis can be with transmission electron microscopy to look into single crystals and look into the planes of atoms in the very high resolution transmission electron microscopy, right? So there are various levels, various resolutions, various widths and breadths of each and every topic that several people complete their PhDs on the same topic using different techniques, using different levels of depth, using the application side, using the academic side. So there are numerous areas that people discover with time, and that carries the train of knowledge forward. This is the global pool of knowledge which you are adding to, where you are adding your contribution to. If need and significance and justify what the researcher intends to investigate, study, and inquire. Acknowledge, yes, when you mention the previous studies, you acknowledge what the others have done, because you are not starting from zero. You are putting your feet on the shoulders of many for the last 200-300 years who did work, and you are putting your feet on their shoulders to take the train of knowledge forward and forward. So they must be acknowledged. If they were not there, then you would have not been able to carry out this project. This should be written in such a comprehensive and progressional manner, that you don't lose your reader. You don't lose your reader because of unnecessary explanations. Right? Unnecessary things should not be there. Otherwise, the reader will leave you. But you shouldn't leave any significant information which makes the reader deserted with your work. All the significant information must be there, but not unnecessary stories. Every sentence in a thesis or research publication must be justified. If I ask you why this sentence is there and you are unable to reply, this means remove it. It should not be there. There must be reason for every word and every sentence you write in your thesis. The last part of this chapter, literature review chapter, should be the aims and objectives squeezed out from the previous studies and the need of the world. The need of the world, that there are gaps in the previous studies. That is why I am pursuing this project. But the need is equally important. Is it economically significant? Is it academically significant? So the need must be mentioned. Research methodology. These are the techniques which you use to reach your goals. How will you achieve the objectives of your study? So, for example, if you are studying phase and microstructural analysis of a material, then you must know the principles of X-ray diffraction, the principles of electron diffraction, the principles of neutron diffraction. So whichever technique you are using in your study, you must know about the theory of that technique, the principles of that instruments. Right? If you are not using something there, then don't put unnecessary things there. So whatever you are using in your study, you must know the theory and the principle of that technique. Secondly, whatever material you are using in your study, it must be described in the research methodology or materials and methods chapter of your thesis. How much is the purity of the raw material you are using? From where you got this material, the company name, the purity of the raw material you are using. X-ray diffraction, you are using a pananalytical machine, you are using a jewel machine, you are using some other machine. There are many Bruker's X-ray diffractometer. Which source of X-ray radiation is being used in that machine? Whether it is copper source, molybdenum source, or some other source. Are there any slits to filter out some of the radiations from reaching the sample? Mention that. What speed, scanning speed, did you use in your study? 1 degree per minute, 0.5 degree a minute, 0.1 degree a minute. That must be mentioned there. Strip size. If you are using a strip size like that, then F 0.02, 0.04. If you are using 0.02 strip size, then your 1 point is here and the other is here. So what information you had here was lost. So you will have to give a reasonable strip size that you don't lose any information. Right? You want to take a bath in a canal, but you are jumping over the canal. So you don't find the canal in your way. So your strip must be reasonable enough so that you don't lose any important information from your plot. What sort of sample did you put in your machine? Because if you put solid sample, you put single crystal, you put fine powder of your sample in the machine, they will give slightly different results. And you will not be able to compare your results with previous studies. So whatever method you use, you must know that the wavelength of the X-rays you are using, the machine you are using, the strip size, the speed of the scanning of the sample, and the range of the angles, 2 theta angles, from 10 to 80 degree, from 10 to 90, 10 to 40, 10 to 60. Where are the significant peaks of your material coming, which justifies the use of that particular range? So all the parameters and description is included in this chapter. This chapter, the most important thing is there must be no repetition in your thesis. So this chapter should be so much consistent that you put all the information relevant to the methodology in this chapter, so that you don't need to repeat this information in the results and discussion chapter. Right? All the information regarding the methodology should be included here. If you are saying that I use this method because of this, write it here, so that you don't need to repeat it in the results and discussion section. If the chapter name is results and discussion, it must include results and discussion and nothing else. That is why this chapter is very, very significant. The make and model of the machine, the country of manufacturing of the machine, everything should be there. If you know about the resolution of the machine, it must be there. Because if the resolution is not there and somebody reports something else, you will not be able to question that. So the resolution and everything should be included in this chapter.